All right, everybody, and welcome. My name's Lisa Schroeder. I'm president of the WIT Trust, as well as the Trade Policy Director for Dow. And thanks to everybody for joining for what I know is going to be an incredibly insightful conversation today, especially because the topic that we're talking about was generated by one of the WIT Trust's Fall 2020 scholarship winners, Laura Spector. I want to thank Laura very much for not only being part of the program, but providing such a candid and thought-provoking essay that really helped us bring together this conversation, which is going to focus on AGOA, and especially where we can go forward in terms of a more progressive U.S.-Africa trade relationship. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Trust is the charitable arm of the broader Women in International Trade group. We do run a semester essay competition, which the scholarship is not only a $1,500 scholarship, which is worth it right there, but more importantly, as Laura will demonstrate, it really gives you access and engagement with the community. A program such as this, built on the topic of the essay, as well as a mentorship relationship and membership in WIT, which is a great way of transitioning an academic career into a professional career. For those of you who are interested in spring 2021, the scholarship essay competition closes tomorrow. So I'd encourage you to go to the WIT website, take a look at the requirements, and see if you don't have something that you can tailor and submit to us. We really look forward to the contributions and especially the amazing topics. I am really honored to turn this program now over to Hera Abbasi, who's going to moderate and introduce our amazing panel. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you to everyone for attending, especially to our esteemed panelists. I'm your moderator, Hera Abbasi, and I work on trade policy for IBM. I just wanted to provide some context on IBM in Africa, just very briefly. For nearly a century, we provided African businesses and governments with the innovative information and communications platforms they need to conduct their business. And today we have a direct presence in over 20 countries in Africa with clients across all sectors. And we're very proud of the work that we do and the partners that we have on the ground. Now I will introduce you to our esteemed speakers. What I'll do is provide their bio and then have them speak so that we can sort of maximize the back and forth. So first, I'm going to start with our WIT Scholarship Trust winner, Laura Spector. She's a graduate student at the University of Maryland, completing her master's in public policy with a specialization in international security and economic policy. She has interned at a trade association, at USTR, and at the Development Finance Corporation. Her graduate research focuses on the future of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Laura is going to provide us a scene setter. And with that, Laura, off to you.
Thanks. Well, hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. And thanks to WIT for putting on this panel. As Hera mentioned, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Spector. I'm a graduate student at Maryland, and I'm the Fall 2020 WIT Trust Young Leader Scholarship recipient. As she also mentioned, I'm currently working on my independent capstone, which is focusing on making policy recommendations to improve the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So I may be a little bit biased, but I think that the topic of the panel today is both exciting and critically important. So in my research, I've spoken to African trade officials and experts in several countries across the African continent. I found that some of the reports and trade statistics that I read online don't always tell the whole story. So when AGOA was first passed over 2 decades ago, Africans were obviously excited about having access to the massive American market. They were excited about the prospect of attracting investment into their industries and seeing tangible economic growth. And there have been a lot of success stories. Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania have significantly increased their cut flour exports to the US. Small farmers in Kenya have taken advantage of AGOA and become more competitive in exporting macadamia nuts and other products. And several other countries have utilized AGOA's fabric provisions to export clothing and textiles. That's just a few examples. But despite these victories, AGOA has been largely underutilized. In conversations for my project, I've heard about many of the challenges and limitations that countries face. Countries lack the capacity sometimes to develop new value-added products. They lack the proper infrastructure to transport perishable agricultural goods. They might lack the technical expertise to facilitate trade across borders efficiently. especially within Africa, not to mention exporting all the way to the US. So I think it's important that we seek to increase our support to these African partners on the continent and provide greater investment and assistance in these areas. And that's sort of what my research is seeking to sort of navigate. And AGOA, as we all know, has been central to US-Africa trade policy for decades and has undoubtedly been a useful tool at promoting things like good governance, strong regulatory frameworks, human rights. But as with everything, there is room for improvement. So I'm excited to hear from our panel of experts today and get their thoughts on some of these challenges, as well as engage with all of you today in an interactive dialogue about how we can work together to make a real difference. So thank you to the WIT Trust for bringing young leader voices into the discussion, and thank you all for being here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura, for that comprehensive scene setter, and congratulations on all the wonderful work you're doing as you pursue your degree. Now we're going to turn to our panelists, and first we will start with Flory Leiser. She's the third president and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa. Ms. Leiser brings expertise and an extensive network on trade in Africa to her role, along with a strong track record of working with the private sector to translate policy into action. She's the first woman to lead the council since its founding in 1993. Ms. Leiser joined CCA from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, where she was the ouster for Africa since 2003. At USTR, she led trade and investment policy towards 49 sub-Saharan African nations and oversaw implementation of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is the topic of our discussion today. She's had several positions in trade and government, and Flory, we'll hand it over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hera, and thank you, Laura, for your introduction. Congratulations to you on being featured today and for the work that you're doing and the scholarship you've received in this very, very important topic of U.S.-Africa trade, including the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. I wanted to affirm some of the things that Laura said. First of all, but put it in a larger context. I think that it is critical that the U.S. have a strategy and a framework for increasing U.S.-Africa trade and investment. We want to make sure that trade and investment and not aid are leading our economic engagement with the nations of Africa. They still account, Africans, for only about 3% of all global trade. And account for, I think, less than 2% of US trade. So there's a lot of room to grow there. On the other hand, I would say that AGOA has at least set the foundation and the framework over the last 20 plus years in shifting the focus on Africa from aid to trade. And this is really critical. Its goal was to enhance Africans' ability to compete in the US market in non-oil products. And it has done that. But as Laura said, it has been underutilized. There are countries who use AGOA in small ways, and it means big things for them. But on the whole, you have maybe 6 to 8 countries which account for the majority of AGOA trade, and it's focused in particular sectors. And so what needs to happen is a continuation of diversifying Africa's capacity to ship value-added products, to add a value to process the raw materials that they have. Everyone in the world goes to Africa for their raw materials. They are the suppliers of that to the Chinas, the US, and others of the world. But what we're hoping AGOA has done and will continue to do in whatever framework the US chooses to do this is to work with them as partners to help them increase their capacity and their competitiveness in global trade, including in their trade with us. But presumably this would benefit them across the globe. Now, we need to make sure that we have more tools, more technical assistance and support to the Africans, and I think more partnership with the Africans in terms of designing what it is we'd like to see as a framework for US-Africa trade post AGOA, or even now, we can talk about that. The African Continental Free Trade Area, which will establish the largest trade area, free market area in the world, is a great opportunity for us to sit down with the Africans and see what it is that we could do that's continental in its coverage and scope. But at the same time, I think that it is important that we look at options for things beyond AGOA. And I am one who supports the fact that we have invited Africans. We didn't force any Africans, but we have invited the Africans to join us in a free trade area negotiation, a free trade agreement negotiations. Kenya, as you know, is the first, but there are actually others who have also said they are interested as well. And if the US can use FTAs with key champions in different regions, maybe Ghana and West Africa, obviously Kenya and East Africa. South Africa is a part of the customs union of SACU, the Southern African Customs Union. So anything you do with them is going to relate to Botswana and Lesotho and others. And that's actually true for Kenya as well, which is a part of the East African Community Customs Union. So I think, though, that if we use FTAs with these champion countries around the region, we already have an FTA with Morocco in the north, that we could probably piece together a framework of agreements that are regional and then also continental. So, you start with Kenya, it applies to EAC. You start with Ghana, it applies to ECOWAS, etc. And by doing that, you set a framework across the continent. But I do think that it's important that with congressional input, that we have a clear path to what it is we would like to establish with Africa, and that we sit down with the Africans as partners. I'll just one subnote, when the Europeans started graduating Africans from their GSP program, they left everything but arms in place for the least developed countries, they also at that time said they were going to negotiate these economic partnership agreements, which are like FTAs, not our FTAs, but they're like FTAs because they are two-way and not one-way unilateral trade programs. They didn't really give the Africans much choice in that. And so Africans have negotiated EPAs with the Europeans. I think the US should not do it that way. I think that the US should sit down with the Africans in partnership and say, what is the best way to expand US-Africa trade and investment? I have just a few other points. I think that when we get to looking at extending AGOA, we all know that it will end in September of 2025. When we start looking at that, we should be thinking about how do we add to that, maybe as a framework over it, a broader trade and development framework with our African partners. What can we do? Could we use the AFCFTA as a basis for doing that? And so even though we might continue AGOA, that AGOA is just unilateral preferences from the US and it only covers goods. And I think it's important for us to look at issues like trade and services with the Africans. Services, in fact, contributes more to GDP growth in Africa than goods trade does. So, why would you negotiate an agreement with Africans that didn't cover services? That's where they are even more competitive. We should give them a chance in an agreement with them or a framework with them where they can talk about what's critical for them as well. And services is certainly one of those areas. And then lastly, what I would say is that we need to incentivize US investment into Africa and especially into African manufacturing. I think that we saw with the breakdown in supply chains globally because of COVID, the Africans are actually very well situated now to take on more of the manufacturing in key value chains. And this is something where the Africans have for a while been saying, invest in us in manufacturing. give us an opportunity to produce value-added goods and to have US companies that invest in that. We are doing some of that, but there is obviously so much more that could be done and should be done. And we should be incentivizing US companies to invest in manufacturing and in key value chains in Africa, beyond apparel, beyond footwear, value-added agricultural products. You know, most of Africa's cashews and other products like that still go to Vietnam and other places to be processed and then shipped to the rest of the world. There's no reason why we shouldn't invest in processing Africa's own products and resources and making them a part of the global value chains so that they can benefit more from global trade. So I just think that that's the key for looking at how we go forward with the Africans. We've got to make sure that they benefit more from global trade and that US companies have an opportunity to trade with and invest in Africa on a level playing field. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Flory. A lot of good points that I know folks have examined and continue to examine, especially with the new administration and our new USTR, Catherine Tai. All right, moving on to our next panelist, we have Naedai Ifudu, who is a partner at Aiken Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld. She counsels companies and individuals on US laws and policy affecting cross-border transactions, including export control laws, economic sanctions and trade embargoes, anti-boycott laws, anti-corruption laws, including the FCPA, and anti-money laundering laws. She represents clients in trade matters before various US government agencies, including the Departments of Commerce, State, and Treasury. She maintains an active pro bono practice and in December of 2020, joined the board of the Center for Democracy in the Americas. Naedai, over to you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I heard you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Hera, my fellow panelists, and Laura. Thank you for the opportunity to join you all for today's discussion, and thank you for the invitation, Wit. I have to confess that I feel a little out of my depth being on a panel with Flory, whose reputation precedes her. And I am certainly not a trade policy specialist, but I am part of Aiken Gump's Africa Initiative, and we really believe that Africa is the next frontier for expanding legal work. Being a Nigerian national myself, I view part of my role within the firm as really supporting clients who do business in high-risk jurisdictions, right? And we know that a lot of African countries are high risk for a number of issues that can sometimes deter foreign investment. And so it is from that lens, my legal lens, and in supporting US companies who do business in Africa, it is through that lens that I pay attention and try to follow developments in Africa, not only because of my personal interest, but also to the extent that these developments can be relevant for my clients who do business in Africa. Related to AGOA, I think that a lot of my comments, and I'll try to keep it brief in order not to be repetitive, but a lot of my comments sort of echo what we've already heard from Flory, right? So I think we know that AGOA is the key and really most significant trade partnership between Africa and the US. And over the years, it has produced tangible outcomes for certain African countries, as well as to some extent, I think also increased two-way trade between AGOA eligible countries and the US. But it is clear that usage of AGOA has declined consistently in the past couple of years, and there's significant decline in the trade volume between the US and Africa. So undoubtedly, there is a need to look at AGOA with fresh eyes to determine whether it sort of dies in 2025, or if it is renewed for whatever term Congress determines, if there are modifications that should be made to reflect the times, or if AGOA should be, as Flory suggested, supplemented, right? So we know that particularly with the larger trading partners of the US, there is capacity to enter into bilateral agreements where, you know, the US is, especially in countries where the US is already at a disadvantage to counterparts from Europe and Asia. In addition, we know that many African countries are making plans to boost inter-African trade by signing on to the African Continental Free Trade Area. And so this would be a time to really be thinking about our long-term strategy to reform and or supplement AGOA. I think there's a view that countries like South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, which is already discussing a free trade, it's already in free trade agreement negotiations with the US, but there's agreement that these larger countries with more developed economies should perhaps graduate beyond a one-way preferential trade program like AGOA towards a more reciprocal trade mechanism with the US. However, to the extent that there are, and there will continue to be, you know, African countries that are yet to meet middle income status, perhaps AGOA continues to serve as an avenue to keep them engaged and to continue US trade partnership with these less mature economies. In terms of thinking about ways that AGOA could be modernized or revised, I think Congress should consider perhaps expanding product coverage and reviewing eligibility criteria, you know, to examine policies that perhaps continue to impede trade, right? So we want to think about eligibility criteria that consider data privacy, digital trade, and sort of the issues that we're facing today that perhaps may not have existed at the time AGOA was implemented back in 2000. So that's sort of my high-level intro on AGOA.
Wonderful, thank you so much. All right, and we are going to go to our next and last but not least panelist, as they say. And by the way, we have this panelist stepped in for us when a previous panelist had to bow out last minute due to some professional obligations. So next we are moving on to Angel Cuemo, who is the president and CEO of Astra Tegic Group, a firm that provides international trade advisory and strategic services to multidimensional entities willing to engage with Africa and emerging markets. She also founded Believe in Africa, an organization aimed at promoting the role of the African private sector in Africa's transformation and empowering women. She has since trained 66,000 women in rural areas across 22 African countries, very impressive. She's also worked for 7 years in the US Congress and played a key role in policy formulation on issues affecting the global economy. She worked tirelessly on the passage of legislation to increase US-Africa trade relations, and she also wins award for being for geographical commute to our lovely panel. So thank you, Angel, off to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here. And I feel very, very humbled to be sharing the platform with Flory Lizer, who is our goddess when it comes to US-Africa trade in AGOA. I'm echoing what Nedi just said, that is very difficult to make contribution after her remarks without having to repeat ourselves. So I'm going to try to bring the pragmatic angle of the AGOA implementation, given the fact that I'm currently in my home country in Cameroon, working on women agribusiness programs. So what I can say, the precision I can bring to what needs to happen with AGOA after 2025 is, as Flory said, AGOA was laid the foundation of a new engagement with Africa. 20 years, 25 years later, I think within the context, the post-COVID context, it's really important that we redefine the US engagement with Africa. We redefine the trade investment framework to make sure it responds to the African needs and really embodied what President Biden said, meaning that we need to build a mutually beneficial partnership with African countries. So the new, what I would call the AGOA second generation, could respond to many imperatives. It's true that we all want to promote trade investment, but today our economy is absolutely intertwined. We saw that with COVID, how it has impacted all the countries, all the citizens in the world, and the same thing for security. So in that sense, the AGOA eligibility criteria was what aimed at building indicators and helping those African recipients to build the institutions. So in that sense, it's very important to continue to strengthen the eligibility criteria to make sure they respond to the security need, the transparency, governance, and also, as the previous speaker said, the current imperative, which is data privacy, access to technology, digital revolution. Those are the elements that we cannot ignore. If you spend time in Africa right now, all the youth, all of them being educated or not educated, you don't even know who is educated or not, because the small SMEs or the people that are active in the informal sectors, most of them sometimes have college degree. So the digital cannot be overlooked. Maybe we should consider in the capacity building component of the AGOA legislation, put some strength into capacity building and technology development. So, and then the second point I would like to make in terms of building the framework of this new engagement with Africa is to strengthen the trade investment format. It may look like engaging in free trade negotiation. This is one avenue, because we all know that the negotiation itself can be a catalyst for trade, can be a catalyst for reform, and can help to assist African countries that are engaged in negotiation with us uplift their institution to meet the international standard. So FTA negotiation is an important tool to reorganize our trade framework with African countries, continue to solidify our relationship within the context of a more South-South relationship. Now, if you talk to SMEs here in Africa right now, to talk to the Lambda, Alpha, Beta businessmen in those chambers, many of them goes to other developing countries for partnership, India, Turkey. I'm not even talking about China. China is a big elephant in the room, but even the Northern European countries are stepping in right now. So this trade negotiation we have keep the American companies on the leadership position in terms of technology, know-how, and the rest, and also help compete with the traditional competitors, meaning the European countries and the big investors like the Chinese parasitic companies and China policy toward Africa, even the Middle East policy toward Africa right now. So this is one aspect. So the last thing I would like to say is that, as Floyd said, America has the difference between American policy, American engagement, and European engagement, the former Korean power engagement is, and we saw that with the MCC, is America wants to respond to African needs. And right now, what Africa needs now, they talk a lot about intra-Africa trade relation. And actually, the AFCFTA came at the perfect time when the world was completely shut down. So Africans have to redefine my battery chargers. Have to redefine their relationship with the neighboring country, but they couldn't export their products when they relying on the economy was relying on export to Europe or to the US. within the post-COVID era, we need to consider, like Cameroon, for example, increase your export to Nigeria, from that, increase your export to your regional footprint to make sure you respond to you keep your economy going. So what Africa needs right now is capacity building. They are requesting everywhere, in every country you go, you will hear women, because I'm dealing with women, they all want to have value-added product. They want to process their cocoa. They want to build their own jewelry. They want to build their own clothes. They all want to have capacity building so they can be able to produce, have transformed products, start building an industry. I'm not going to talk about industrialization because it may be too ambitious. We can see that happening in 2025, 2050 or not. But at least we can get the SMEs out of the informal sector and start building a micro industry and help SMEs and women process their good so they can create jobs here and they can use technology to sell their goods internally, regionally, and internationally. So with AGOA, to close, with AGOA as an investment tool, it will allow to attract more investment in the African market and have a making company be competitive within the African market, within the CFTA framework. If you look at, if we think about a new relationship with Africa on the long term, it's not just import export, it's also investment, being at the forefront of building the continental market, especially after all the negotiation that we embark into right now. And it's really likely that we continue if we maintain this engagement, if Congress continue the consultation they're doing right now to create a second generation of AGOA, a new trade investment platform for Africa, I think will bear fruit and will make a mutually beneficial partnership a reality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Angel. Right now, we're going to go to Q&A, and I'm just going to sort of go through these, and hopefully we can get a lot of the Q&A portion done. I know we have some wonderful questions coming in. I'll start with a question that Angel just referenced in her opening remarks, which is about China. This question asks, how can the US better compete with malign influence on the continent from actors such as China via their Belt and Road Initiative, for example, which strips nations of valuable resources and leaves them in unsustainable debt? That's one of the questions that we received. So if anyone wants to tackle the ever complex question of China, please feel free.
Well, maybe I can jump in. I think I have a particular perspective about China, which, so you know, Corporate Council on Africa, we have both US and African companies, multinationals and SMEs. Our members, and I believe, you know, all US companies that are in Africa are not there to counter China. They are there for the same reasons that companies from all around the world are there. It's the opportunities that Africa poses for businesses. Africa is an important part of the bottom line for many companies. You know, for our members, I was just talking to folks from Boeing yesterday. They're expanding into Sudan, Ethiopia, etc. You know, we have companies, Procter & Gamble and Caterpillar, Visa, that have been there for decades in Africa. And so, you know, we're not absent. US is not absent there. I do think that seeing Africa only through the lens of you know, countering China is really not productive, because I think it's not the real reason that US companies are there. But I would say that there are practices that other countries have, including China, in supporting their businesses in Africa, which I think the US needs to step up and be more proactive. This is why we supported the you know, the Prosper Africa approach, and, you know, in discussions with key people in the current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, I think that they will continue a policy of Prosper Africa, which is bringing all of the US agencies together to support US businesses that are on the ground in Africa and competing there for the very lucrative business of that market. And so, again, I think that the Africans do not feel like they need to choose one partner only. They have ways that they collaborate with the Chinese, but they very much appreciate and seek US partners. I hear that all the time. And they value our products, what that means for them in terms of global supply chains, their opportunity to work with US companies. And our companies operate very differently in Africa in terms of skills transfer and the kind of partnerships that we establish with the Africans. So again, everything that China is doing in Africa is not bad. There are some things that I think we should be concerned about, but I think we should really just be focused on how do we support US companies, how do we support US goals for trade and investment in Africa, and try not to focus too much on what others are doing there. Again, I think that that's the way the Africans would see it as well, that they want to partner with us, but they have certain ways that, they're partnering with others. And we shouldn't just go there thinking that, we're just there to compete with and counter, other folks. We have our very own reasons for being in Africa, and they're good ones.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hera.
Thank you, Florian. I should mention that the editorializing of the previous question was not provided by us. It was a question that was submitted. So this is not to say that all of us think there's a malign influence or anything. Just want to put that out there on the record.
Right. No, we understood that, Hera.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, Flori is absolutely right. There was a survey that was done by Corporate Council in Africa a few years ago, and talking to African CEOs and which partner they want to meet. American companies was about far at the top of the list, who they want to do business with. But when you interact with them now, they'll tell you, sometimes they go the easiest route. I think I'm sure Florian remember the one minister who said, if you cannot marry the woman you want, you marry the one you have. So you want to do business that American, they're not there, we do business with the person who's in front of us. And that's what happened actually. They were very aggressive, but with the incentive that we hope the Biden administration will put in place with Prosper Africa, I think the American companies are more inclined to get into that and ignore the risk factor and be more active and aggressive in the African market.
Can I just jump back in on one thing too that and Nettie referred to this on the perception of risk in Africa, and what we can do to go to the point of what is it that the U.S. can do. And I think that we have there's the real risk, because there are some risk in investing anywhere in the world, including in Africa, and then there are perceptions of risk. And I think that many people, the top economists at the World Bank, the head of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, have all talked about the fact that we need to actively counter the misperception that investing in Africa is riskier than anywhere else, investing anywhere else in the world. If you look at the record in terms of African default on loans, et cetera, they actually do fairly well in terms of the standards that one would use for risk. And I think that in terms of risk mitigation, we have things, institutions like the Development Finance Corporation, which used to be OPIC, which is investing heavily in Africa. We have the Exim Bank, which now had a 7-year reauthorization. They've never been reauthorized for that long, to support US companies who want to sell their products in Africa, and have the support of Exim Bank, which did not function, as you all know, for a number of years. And then we have agencies like the US Trade and Development Agency that allows people to do feasibility studies of projects in Africa. So I would just say that expanding the platforms and the tools that we can use. And the last thing that I would say, which people overlook, especially when they're talking about China, there's this perception that China has been the biggest investor in African infrastructure. And I just, I beg to differ, because if you look at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, the investments that they have made in more than a dozen African countries over the years, it is in the tens of billions. And I was privileged to be able to go and visit a number of our MCC compact projects in a range of African countries all over the continent. We have built roads, we have built farm to market roads, we have invested in the agriculture sector, power, water and sanitation, improvement of ports. So in my view, the U.S. is not a very good, they don't handle their PR very well. I think others do much better at PR than we do. And I think that if we look at the facts, I'm not one to push PR, but always focused on the facts. If you look at the facts, I think that we are a major investor in Africa's infrastructure. And I think that in cooperation with others on the continent, like the African Development Bank, which we support, Frexim Bank, and working with the African Union, I think that the U.S. has a really great opportunity to support investments in Africa that make sense from our perspective. And again, to not worry about what other countries are doing, even if they play it up as a lot and it maybe isn't so much. That's my view.
Great points, thank you. All right, here's another general question. Recognizing that Africa is not a monolith, what are some common misconceptions that you encounter about doing business in Africa? I think that's a really, really important point to hit. So over to whoever would like to start.
Well, I can maybe. Angel, where you gonna start? Oh, okay. I can maybe share some thoughts here. And I think this is one that Flori already alluded to, but there is the perception that African countries are too volatile and unpredictable, and to a degree that is perhaps more acute in African countries than perhaps other regions, right? So this idea that sub-Saharan Africa is exposed to insurmountable risks, and companies need to be prepared to navigate volatility. So for example, Nigeria has been affected, has been, is one country where a lot of multinationals have sort of established a presence, but at some point beginning in about 2014, and for many reasons, companies began to sort of turn towards East Africa. And my understanding is that some of that shift was propelled by fears regarding Ebola, right? And tumbling oil prices. But following that, they've had peaceful elections in Nigeria. And, on the other hand, East African countries, and Kenya in particular, have experienced terrorist attacks. But all of that notwithstanding, these disruptions have subsided, and none of them, based on what I understand, substantially reduced opportunities for multinationals in Nigeria or Kenya. And so when sort of analyzing or assessing level of volatility, it's necessary to assess whether a change in fundamental strategy is really necessary, or whether what is required is perhaps a short-term contingency plan, right, instead of a wholesale movement. Another, I guess, misconception tends to be, I think, for those companies, for some companies who decide to look at Africa, there's sometimes it's a perception that since the region is considered to be one of fast growth, that is going to lead to a quick turnaround, right, in terms of benefits and profits. But I think with Africa, you have to think of it as a long-term game. The region's development, I think, is going to span several decades. So when investing in Africa, the mindset has to be that perhaps top-line growth may be strong, but bottom-line returns on investment may, in fact, take years to materialize. So, but I'll open it up to my panelists to share their thoughts on perhaps other misconceptions. And I think, Flora, you already hit at some of them, but there might be others, Angel.
Did anyone else want to jump in? Although I think, you covered the sort of all the misconceptions quite well. Thank you for doing that. Okay, I will ask another question. This is from an audience member, or I should say an attendee. Looking at the future, if AGOA is to be revised to include digital trade, including services, any thoughts on how U.S. companies can engage in the fintech space that is already booming in Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa? And I personally would love to hear also just on digital trade in general, since that is something that many of us are tracking.
So maybe I'll just jump in. I think this is why it's so important for us to have a trade and investment framework with Africa that goes beyond trade in goods, because the digitalization of trade, the digital economy in Africa has grown. There is a huge uptick in the percentage of entrepreneurs, many of whom are young and women, and small companies, SMEs, that are accessing local markets, regional markets, and global markets through the use of the internet and digital trade, e-commerce, et cetera. And so, I think that, again, this is an important area where if we can put in place the kinds of rules of the road for the digital economy that benefit, Africans. They are, some of the first who, in fintech, I think, it was many years ago when I first experienced M-Pesa, and the online banking platforms that have developed in Africa by young entrepreneurs. I have someone on my board, the CEO of Flutterwave, which is in the fintech space and doing a phenomenal job there. They're an SME, but I don't think they'll be S for long. And so, I'm bullish on looking at the key areas where Africans can expand, telecommunications services, financial services, and so the fintech area, digital trade. These are all areas that I think that we, really have an opportunity, and where U.S. companies really are looking to partner with African companies in these areas. And so, we need to be creative in how we look at the partnership with our African trading partners. And again, looking at how we can invest in ways that both support U.S. companies and our bottom line, while also being attuned to what the Africans are looking for in terms of partnership. Many of them, they're not looking for, handouts. They're really looking for partners and investors. And I think that US companies are well suited to that, not only in the fintech area, but in other key and growing sectors as well.
And then to add to what Flory said is the regulatory aspect of it. I think the young population, all those, Nigeria and Lagos alone has the highest concentration of IT student IT experts. They are moving faster than the government. And I think one area where the US government can assist with is helping them build the infrastructure, build the regulation, because the fintech is not regulated. Data privacy are not regulated. They're all operating as and it just happen. And I think we can really assist, create that for those frameworks, even use the regional framework or even the continental one, and have a privacy, data protection, intellectual property, and all those areas where they really need to strengthen the institution to address the security need, money laundering needs, all those realities. And that's where we can have tangible results in 1 or 2 years in supporting US African government build the institution to respond to the data revolution or even the industrial revolution.
And if I could just add to Annette's point, which I thought was an excellent one about, what companies need to think about. You can't, you need to be patient and be present in terms of Africa. You cannot just jump into the African market, well, we can't take trips anymore, but I remember when people would think they're going to go to a particular country, they'll be there for a week, they think they'll sign deals and they'll come back home, and no, it doesn't work like that. And I think that, having a presence on the continent when you want to partner is important. So the partnership and the presence in those partnerships is important. And I think the patience is important. I think to Annette's point, though, about the long-term returns, I think that in some cases, investments that are made by US company, they're in sectors where the returns are down the road, but that's true in other countries and regions as well. And so it's not so much sometimes that it's just in Africa that it takes a while for the returns to come in. But the point I would make on that is that, sometimes the African leadership is not aware that there are certain policies and regulations and laws that get in the way of companies, local and foreign, being able to invest in their markets. And, this is why when countries decide, for example, that they're going to improve their World Bank doing business scores, that, companies look at that because they are addressing concrete issues, specific challenges that companies face on the ground in Africa. And, at CCA, our job is to both educate the American companies about Africa and the opportunities there, the risk real versus perceived, as well as talk to the African governments and leadership about the kinds of policies, regulations, and laws that they need to have in place if they really want to invite investment into Africa, and the kind of investment they want, not just in commodities and raw materials, but in value-added manufacturing. And so, I just think that if the countries know specific things they need to do and they do them, then US companies investing there will actually be able to reap the benefits from their investments sooner. Right now it may take a little longer, but I think once you eliminate those barriers and improve the doing business environment in general, I think that folks are able to actually, improve their bottom lines and in a shorter period of time.
Wonderful, thank you. And with that, we are actually approaching the end of the hour. So I will ask our panelists to maybe give a minute sort of overarching sort of chapeau on what they said, on what you said. And I would also encourage our attendees to look up the work that our panelists have done, to use them as a resource and their organizations as a resource. Clearly, we're very fortunate to have a wonderful group of talented and smart women. So, you know, we should take advantage of that. And with that, let's start our closing remarks. And Flory, if you want to kick that off, that'd be great.
I do, and I don't want to take too much time, but we didn't talk about, you know, the data, and I think it's important for people to have the facts. So I want to just use my time to share a little bit of the facts and then just a closing point. So imports under AGOA in 2020, they went down to 4.1 billion in 2020 compared to 8.4 billion in 2019, but most of that was due to a decrease in imports of oil, which actually declined by 85%. And then, but AGOA non-oil trade, even though it declined in 2020 to 3.4 billion, it was only an 8.5% decline in a year that was really tough, right? So in 2019, they had 3.8 billion, in 2020, 3.4 billion. There were certain sectors that grew though, like transportation equipment, under AGOA in 2020 actually grew compared to 2019. And then I just wanted to share that the top US imports under AGOA in 2020 were mineral fuels, woven apparel, knit apparel, motor vehicles and parts, ferroalloys, and macadamia nuts. And the top 5 countries in 2020 were in order: South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Lesotho, and Ethiopia. And you know, this is important to, you know, I should have done that in the beginning to just say this is kind of the context. We had a major decline, but some of that was due to COVID and the things that happened in commodity markets in Africa. I would just say that 2021, to end, 2021, I think is a year of comeback and economic recovery. Obviously for the United States, and our own companies, but also for Africa, that took the double whammy of the health impact of COVID, as well as the economic impact of COVID, you know, with them shut down, you know, airlines that couldn't fly, tourism that came to a screeching halt, etc. 2021, in my view, is the beginning of a new time. And it's a good time because we have a new US administration that is looking at Africa. Or we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which has started to be implemented, a continental market. And so I think with that, this is a great time for us to be looking at how we enhance, and I think as Angel said, revitalize and redefine our trade and investment partnership with Africa. And I think this is a great time to do that. Thank you.
Great. Nettie, did you want to offer a quick?
Yeah, just I echo, and I love to see Flory's optimism, and I hope that that there are many similar-minded US companies in terms of the opportunities that 2021 has in store with respect to Africa. I mean, there is no doubt that doing business in Africa, as with many regions, right, is fraught with challenges, including legal, business, and political risk. However, there are significant opportunities to create businesses focused on addressing the various unmet needs in various African countries. There are fast-growing and profitable businesses in Africa, and those that tend to be profitable are those that see the many challenges present in Africa as really opportunities for innovation, right? And so I would encourage the administration, this new administration, I would encourage Congress to really focus on deepening commercial ties with African countries. That could be through a modernized or reformed AGOA, but also through tools and initiatives that were created under the outgoing administration, or the just this past administration. So things like Prosper Africa, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, all of these are tools that are expected to, if properly utilized and implemented, to provide American firms with much needed boosts to allow the U.S. private sector to compete better in a region where countries such as China, Brazil, Russia already have, substantial support of their governments, where these countries have provided an enormous boost to their international companies in recent years. And so I would encourage our government similarly to think about deepening commercial ties and really supporting the U.S. private sector. I would also just end by saying, from my perspective as a legal practitioner, there are many ways to mitigate risk. I think you just need to ask the right questions, seek guidance of experienced consultants like Flory, who understands the African landscape, as well as legal advisors. My job is to help companies identify real landmines, but also to put in place safeguards that can hopefully mitigate any actual risks that exist.
Wonderful, thank you. And Angel?
Okay, I'll do the closing prayer. Okay, yeah, in a nutshell, I'm gonna quote Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield about her commercial and cultural diplomacy. I think the US government in general and American companies in general should use one of the assets that they have is the connection with the continent through the diaspora. Because cultural understanding help you understand the ground. One of the reasons why the developing countries are sometimes, they're not more effective, but in the recent years they've been a little bit more aggressive and more present, is sometimes because they come with Africa, with the African understanding. They don't necessarily think about bringing their understanding of the way of doing business in Africa. So if American firm can adjust a little bit, just a little bit, and come on the ground and trying to learn how to do business in Africa in the best African way, not on the African way, but in the best African way, that would be very, very helpful. Second, the US summit could be a very good tool as well, having American leaders openly send signals to the American companies that the Africa market is right for them, and that would be very encouraging and it's a very effective way to incentivize indirectly and encourage our American companies to embark into those new ventures. The third is, of course, the AGOA. As Flory said, if you look at the products that are very successful, they were exported recently, even despite the decline of all import to the US, is apparel sector, and agro-processed food. All those sectors, the apparel industry, Ethiopia, cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire, if you look at the numbers, they're all processed by women. So we need to revitalize the women program that we had during the previous administration and support women entrepreneurs. In doing so, we make AGOA also implementation also effective because they're already on the ground, be at the forefront of all those non-oil products in all those sectors that are really creating jobs. And lastly is the technical, the know-how and technical assistance we talked about many years with AGOA. I think it can come into fruition with the Power Africa framework, like one-stop shop to support American companies, help them with transactions and with the consultant and all the rest, and help them take advantage of opportunities and help them close deal. I think would be a good addition to the AGOA, and also in closing, supporting the regional integration and continental market. If it becomes a reality, it will going to be good for American firm. It will be good for African firms as well. I think it creates a sizable market that we can really encourage American big firms to get into invest in regional projects and even expand the market and have the return of investment more profitable. And so it's going to be good to see an administration supporting Africa economic integration regionally or continentally. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. And with that, I just want to thank our panelists. Thank you, attendees, for your wonderful questions. I hope if attendees are not members of WIT, they join WIT. You can go to wit.org for more information about membership and a slew of upcoming events that promise to be very fruitful and fulsome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.